Before we get into this, I just wanted to say thank you for all the nice comments on my videos. It's encouraging me to keep going and stick with this stuff, and I appreciate them all, and they were all very nice. Thank you. So, we need to talk about what I've been reading. Or more accurately, we don't really have to talk about what I've been listening to, but we're going to because I thought the title would make a funny joke, cause haha, it's like one of the titles of the books. I listen to audiobooks mostly since I probably have ADHD, so sitting quietly and not having any noise around is physically torturing. But audiobooks let me get that sweet, sweet auditory and mental stimulation while also doing other things with my hands because I am a slave to the curse of capitalism and I love multitasking. I've had varied experiences with books over these past 4 months, which is what I'll be summarizing in this video. I read books very sporadically, so if this becomes a regular thing, it will probably be every couple of months or so. The first book I read that I want to talk about is Perfume by Patrick Suskind. If I end up doing these regularly, you will soon learn that fiction from the past 20 years is not something I consume often, let alone popular fiction from that time frame. 1985 is pretty recent reading material for me because I'm just not like other book girls. It was a recommendation from a pen pal at that, and otherwise I probably wouldn't have known about it, so thank you to her. I didn't actually end up finishing the novel, which is going to be a theme for this video, but in this case I did like the book. I got about 75% done, and then at that point I guess I was just satisfied because my library loan expired and I never checked it out again. And I don't really feel like I missed anything besides the subtitular murder. The language is my favorite kind of purple prose that relies less on grammatical structure and legibility and more on sensation and imagery, while still maintaining enough comprehensibility that you know what's happening. And I think it's this type of writing style that really lets me feel satisfied with not finishing something, because I will admit I'm listening to it just because it makes my ears exquisitely happy. And the story itself I just kind of gloss over, but I did think the main character was very relatable. I also cause children much misery and have heightened sensitivity to smells, except I don't really do anything productive with that, I just get overwhelmed and cry. The next I listened to before Perfume, actually, by a couple months. 1984 by George Orwell. Yeah, I know, I'm a real trendsetter. You probably never heard of this one. But I never had to read it for school, so I had just never read it. My English classes were never really heavy on reading, surprisingly, so I've missed a lot of classics, and over the past couple of years I've been on a journey to go back and read all of them because I do genuinely enjoy a lot of the American classic novels from like the early 1900s. 1984, Catcher in the Rye is on my list, so is Grapes of Wrath, etc. I especially like all these classic novels when I don't have to lie about what I interpreted from them so that the teacher won't flunk me, because apparently creative interpretation has a right or wrong to it. Don't get me started on that. It was what I expected for the most part. I knew what the premise was, but I didn't know any of the content of the actual story. I found the writing style to be simple, and it read similarly to Michael Crichton, whose writing I also like. It serves a similar purpose too, in that this book was probably not a creative exercise or any kind of passionate endeavor in the creative sense, but a politically or socially motivated mouthpiece for spreading the author's opinions. And yeah, authoritarianism is pretty bad, so solid opinion, Mr. Orwell. The only thing about books like these is that there isn't too much to say, since a lot of what counts about them is not really within the writing itself, but more within the time around it and the author. Also, it's political, so not a great idea to discuss that on YouTube. I also listened to Animal Farm in this time period, and it was a bit silly, but it was meant to be ironic and sarcastic and all that good jazz, and at the same time, I hate people and love animals, so effective tool for teaching the scorned like myself political messages. Now, we need to talk about Kevin. Is a book by Lionel Shriver, which is another book I did not finish. I'm not sure I even got to the halfway point, and then I just let my loan expire because, frankly, I was very bored. The letter format doesn't make too much sense in the book's context, and the only pro is that it allows us a deeper look into the mother's perspective, but even then, who writes letters like this? It sounds like a silly criticism, and maybe I'm alone in this, which would be understandable, but I think diary entry and letter-style writing just fails if it isn't as brief and simplistic as real entries or letters are. You aren't penning a gothic novel when you're mailing your ex-husband about your convicted kid. I also suppose I expected more about Kevin, and it would have been okay if we focused on his mom more if she weren't such a repetitive character, given her history was interesting, but a lot of the feelings and themes were repetitive and very boring. I don't like people who argue that it's realistic because even if it is, this is a novel, not real life. Especially in this one where it's a fictional scenario and a book, which means that the author needs to make it engaging for the reader or the reader will stop reading. And that's just what happened. I got to somewhere in Kevin's 2s, I think, before I just moved on from this one. I have heard that the movie's good, so I may watch the movie and talk about it later on. Finally, the last book I read was Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. Look, I know it's hard to leave an abusive relationship, infamously, which is what the main character's relationship becomes throughout the book, but my main gripe is that Rosemary is just plain smooth-brained. Like, legitimately dumb. Horror movie protagonist stupid, which is something I have actually never seen in a book before. It doesn't have anything to do with her not leaving her man. That's not even part of this discussion right now. Just more like, why would you actually believe for a second that anyone would believe you when you tell them a satanic cult is trying to make you give birth to the Antichrist? She barely ever questions if perhaps she's gonna sound weird when she tells a medical doctor her husband wants to sacrifice her kid to Beals. And one could argue that this is because she's disconnected from reality, but the problem with that is that the book didn't really say she was in any way, shape, or form. It didn't show us that, and if it was the intention of the author, then they did a pretty poor job, and now Rosemary just looks, how you say, not smarter than a 5th grader. I knew what the ending would be since I already saw a remake of the movie before, from 2016, but even when that's the case, I still read books or watch the old movies because if it's a good piece of fiction, I will still be captivated, and it'll still leave me with questions. And often there's enough disparities between remakes and originals that I can still justify spending the time on it. But this book didn't do that. I really think the only reason it's famous now is because it was controversial and written about satanic lunatics in a time where it was popular to talk about satanic lunatics under the table, but not necessarily out loud, I think. I might be messing up my satanic panic years. But anyways, the point is that this book was boring and I finished it only because I thought it would possibly get better, and also it was only 5 hours long, and none of the YouTube channels I watch had updated recently. About the ending too, it was incredibly disappointing and poorly written. It felt like Levin had stopped writing in the middle of a scene and just decided to publish the book unfinished. And I don't have an issue with a book ending with evil ultimately winning out. I like those stories that end unhappily because I'm a terrible person, but this ending is just technically so bad that I ended up disliking that quality of it too. One compliment I have for this book is that the pacing was good and the writing itself, stylistically speaking, was alright. But that's about it. Actually there's one more. Dinosaurs Rediscovered by Michael J. Benton, which I'm currently still reading. It's nonfiction and pretty interesting. I love dinosaurs, and the writing is good, parts science and common folk talk, so it's easy to understand even for people like Rosemary and myself. The author does hype himself up a lot, which is kind of annoying. It would appear he's a STEM major, so it's pretty par for the course. Otherwise, cool story, bro. And that was a short summary of all the books I've listened to and read recently. I have a pretty long to get to list, so maybe I'll make these types of videos if anyone interacts with it. Speaking of interacting with it, like it if you like me, and dislike it if you dislike me. Subscribe if you want the aforementioned future videos like this, and why not comment and let me know that too. Unfortunately, I can't telepathically tell what your subscribe means. And if you want to support this channel monetarily, my Etsy and Depop stores are great ways to do that. Since this video is about books and will probably end up pretty short, I'll go ahead and mention that my family wants to open a bookstore at the beginning of next year, and some of the money from my shop goes to that cause. So if you like those, this is a good way to support a family-run secondhand bookstore. Thanks for watching. Bye bye! Editor's side note, I tried to edit out the gross microphone noises. There were way more than usual, and I got most of them, but as you heard, if you're still listening, there was still quite a few in there, so I am sorry for that. I'm not a great audio editor, and I'm not sure how to get them out with Audacity, so buy my crap so that I can afford a proper pop filter and hopefully stop that. My cats ate the last one I had. Okay, bye-bye.